Today, we're going to dive into a topic that often feels hyper-commercialized or treated like an afterthought. Can you guess what it is? Romance. I'm not just talking about the love stories or the Hollywood cliches. I want to explore more about why romance matters in our lives today, especially for young people searching for meaning in a world that often feels disconnected and confusing. We'll look at this from a contemporary philosophical lens, borrowing from thinkers like James Hollis, Friedrich Nietzsche, and Fyodor Dostoyevsky. Voices that deal with meaning, suffering, and the human condition long before us, yet whose insights are always timeless. Let's start with a question that many of us wrestle with. What's the point of romance in an increasingly individualistic and digital world? Let's begin with James Hollis, a Jungian psychoanalyst who explores the idea that our relationships, especially romantic ones, are mirrors reflecting back our deepest truths and fears. Hollis suggests that romance isn't just about finding the one or some external ideal. Instead, it's a journey towards self-discovery. In his book, The Eden Project, Hollis argues that we often enter relationships thinking we're looking for someone to complete us. But what we're often doing, often unconsciously too, is projecting our unresolved emotional needs onto the other person. Hollis calls this the fantasy bond, where we idealize a partner hoping they'll save us from our own emptiness and insecurities. But here's the twist. When that honeymoon phase starts to fade and that idealization starts to crumble, we're faced with a choice. Do we abandon the relationship and look for a new ideal, or do we face the deeper truth about ourselves? According to Hollis, this confrontation with our shadow, again from a Jungian perspective, our insecurities, our wounds, and fears is essential to real psychological growth. Romance then isn't just about happiness or pleasure. It's a crucible where we confront who we truly are and stop running away from ourselves. Imagine that. Instead of seeing romance as something that completes you, think of it as something that challenges you to become more whole, more integrated as an individual. This makes romance a deeply philosophical pursuit and a journey of self-awareness, really. Next, let's turn to Nietzsche, who is famous for his idea of the will to power, the drive that he believes motivates all human actions. Nietzsche argued that the will to power is not just about dominance or control, but about self-overcoming, creating meaning out of chaos, and striving to become who you truly are. Now, how does this relate to romance? Nietzsche would probably tell us that true romantic love isn't about finding a partner that makes you feel comfortable and safe, but one who pushes you to evolve. Real love, for Nietzsche, is a kind of partnership in self-overcoming. It is not about two people selling into complacency. It is about constantly challenging each other to grow. There's a certain danger to this kind of love. It is not the fairy tale we're often sold, but Nietzsche wasn't about comfort. He was about the affirmation of life, even when it was difficult or painful. In Thus Spoke Zarathustra, he talks about the eternal return, the idea that we should live as though we'd be willing to repeat our lives over and over again eternally. Imagine that. Romantic love, in this sense, becomes an arena for testing our values, our strength, and our capacity to bear the weight of existence. If a relationship helps you evolve, if it aligns with your will to power, then it has real meaning. But if it leads to stagnation, the avoidance of personal growth, then Nietzsche would likely see it as a missed opportunity. But think about that for a moment. What if romance wasn't just about companionship or passion, but about forging a deeper version of yourself? A relationship that doesn't just fulfill you, but challenge you to face your fears, confront your weaknesses, and ultimately evolve. Again, there are a lot of parallels between this will to power and that of James Hollis's Eden Project, where it's more so about self-discovery. Now, let's bring Dostoyevsky into the equation. Dostoyevsky is a writer who dives into the depths of human suffering and moral complexity, and his exploration of love is no exception to this. In works like The Brothers Karamazov and Crime and Punishment, love is rarely simple or clean. It is often tangled with suffering, guilt, and some existential doubt. For Dostoyevsky, love has the power to be redemptive, but it is also tied to suffering. In The Brothers Karamazov, one of the most central questions is whether it is possible to love deeply without experiencing deep suffering. Dostoyevsky suggests that suffering and love are intertwined because they both stem from our vulnerabilities. To love someone means to expose yourself to potential pain, the pain of loss, rejection, betrayal, and the mere fragility of human life itself. But Dostoyevsky doesn't view this suffering as pointless. Instead, he sees it as a path to redemption. Through love, we encounter the depths of our own humanity, the good, the bad, and the broken. We're confronted with our own flaws and limitations, and yet, in that struggle, we find a chance for redemption. Romantic love, with all its messiness, becomes a way for us to transcend ourselves. Again, this parallel pattern of evolution. This is actually a radical idea in a culture that often prioritizes ease and comfort. Dostoyevsky's view reminds us that real love is actually transformative, but it requires sacrifice and the willingness to suffer for something greater than yourself, in service to yourself. What does this all mean for us today? In a world where many young people are searching for purpose or feeling isolated or disconnected, romance might seem like either a distraction or just an unattainable ideal. But what Hollis, Nietzsche, and Dostoyevsky show us is that romance isn't just the side of the story of life, it's a central arena for personal transformation. Romance can be a mirror, a crucible, a path to redemption, and it confronts us with who we are and who we might become. It challenges us to evolve, to strive towards a higher version of ourselves. And yes, it might come with suffering, but that suffering isn't without meaning. It's a part of the journey toward growth and self-discovery. In an age where quick fixes and surface-level connections are so common, real romance demands more. It demands that we confront ourselves, our fears, and our vulnerabilities. And in doing so, it gives us the opportunity to find something truly meaningful. So to all the young people out there searching for meaning, don't dismiss romance as just an emotional distraction or a societal expectation. See it as a philosophical journey, a crucible that can forge you into more whole, self-aware, and evolved individual. Embrace that challenge, the suffering, and the growth that comes with it, because in romance, as in life, the struggle is often where we find the most profound meaning. But let's take this exploration a little bit further. One of the greatest tensions in modern relationships is the struggle between freedom and commitment, where we live in a world that celebrates individual freedom, personal autonomy, and the ability to define ourselves, that freedom to pursue whatever it is that we desire. But at the same time, romance often requires commitment, a kind of voluntary limitation of that freedom. That raises a profound question. Can we truly be free while also being deeply committed to someone else? This is a tension Nietzsche touched upon when he spoke about the burden of freedom. To Nietzsche, freedom isn't just the absence of restrictions, it's the responsibility to create meaning in the absence of fixed structures. When you enter into a relationship, you willingly step into a kind of structure, a shared space of meaning with another person. So is that the sacrifice of freedom, or is it another kind of freedom altogether? Is it the freedom to love, to commit, to be vulnerable? What do you think? Does true freedom lie in avoiding commitment, or can it be found within the embrace of a relationship that challenges you to grow? And here's another layer to consider. Are we ever truly free if we're constantly running from the vulnerability that comes with commitment? If every time things get hard, we escape to preserve our own autonomy, are we really exercising freedom, or are we simply just avoiding discomfort? In a world that emphasizes self-reliance and independence, romance asks us to reconsider, what does it mean to be free? Think about this. Therein lays some contradiction within our presuppositions, where we're constantly in the search for meaning, whether we're aware of it or not, but still constantly play within the dynamics of pleasure and pain. This does not make sense because in order to search for meaning, you must transcend the orientation of the hedonistic pleasures of the world. Therefore, suffering, vulnerability, and commitment should be an inherent part of that search for meaning. It is a responsibility and is going to come with something that transcends pain and pleasure. Now, I want to pivot to something that many of us might feel but rarely talk about openly. It's the fear of intimacy. It's ironic that in a time when we can connect with anyone and anywhere through technology, especially for a demographic of young people in the world, we struggle with real, deep intimacy. Why is that, and what exactly is it that we're afraid of? James Hollis would say that intimacy requires us to face parts of ourselves that we'd rather avoid, and fair enough. In relationships, we can no longer hide behind our work, our hobbies, or even our social personas. Our partner sees us in our raw, unfiltered state. That's terrifying to us. We may implicitly ask ourselves, what if they reject us? What if they discover something about us we can barely admit to ourselves? But the deeper question is actually here. Are we ever really alive without that kind of vulnerability? If we guard ourselves so tightly, if we live in the fear of being known, are we really experiencing life to the fullest? Dostoyevsky might argue that to live without love, without the risk of intimacy, is to live a diminished life, where we avoid both the suffering and the potential for transcendence, knocking both of them out of the equation. And think about that again for a moment. What are we really protecting ourselves against when we avoid intimacy? And more importantly, what are we losing in the process? We've explored how romance can be a path to self-discovery, self-overcoming, and redemption. But let's tackle a more fundamental issue at the heart of many existential struggles today: the search for meaning in a nihilistic world. Friedrich Nietzsche famously proclaimed that God is dead, one of his most famous quotes, suggesting that the old structures that gave life meaning, such as religion and tradition, were crumbling. In their place, we were left with a void, a world where meaning is not given to us, but something we have to create for ourselves. And where does romance fit into this? Could it be that romantic love, with all of its complexity and struggle, is one of the last places where we can create real existential meaning? Nietzsche would say that meaning is not something we discover, it is something that we will into existence. And perhaps in the context of love, we find a space to do exactly that. But here's the tricky part. Is love a source of meaning? Or is it simply another distraction from the abyss of meaninglessness? Does our desire for connection, for love, ultimately serve to fill the void within us? Or is it something more transcendent? Is love an answer to nihilism? Or is it just another fleeting escape? I'd love for us all to continue these conversations and consistently ask ourselves these questions. I'd love to hear what you think. Do you believe that love can give life meaning in a way that's lasting? Or is it just another human invention to distract us from the chaos of existence? Nietzsche would challenge us to think about love not as salvation, but as a space where we can create new values, let's say, where we can forge meaning in the face of a chaotic and indifferent universe. But lastly, I'd like to talk about risk. One of the reasons why romance is so powerful and so terrifying as well is that it requires us to take a risk of rejection, a risk of suffering, a risk of losing ourselves in the process. But every meaningful thing in life carries this risk. Nietzsche once again speaks to this when he says, "You must have chaos within you to give birth to a dancing star." The chaos of love, the unpredictability, the vulnerability, all of that chaos is what allows for something beautiful to then emerge. But here's the question. Are you willing to take that risk? Are you willing to embrace the chaos of romance, to let it challenge you, change you, and help you grow? Because without that risk, without that willingness to step into the unknown, can we ever experience the profound rewards that love has to offer? Or perhaps the better question is the avoidance of risk worth the potential loss of meaning? If we guard ourselves too carefully, if we avoid love to stay safe, what do we lose in the process of that? What kind of life are we then left with? So let's leave it to ponder these few questions. What does romance mean to you? Just an emotional experience or a philosophical journey of self-discovery? Are you truly free if you avoid commitment, or is real freedom found within the embrace of love's challenges? Can love give us meaning in a world that often feels void of it, or is it simply another escape? And most importantly, are you willing to take the risk of love and the risk of vulnerability, of suffering, of chaos for the possibility of something deeply transformative? Romance, as we've seen through the lens of Hollis, Nietzsche, and Dostoyevsky, is not just an experience, but a crucible, a mirror, and a chance for redemption. It does require us to face ourselves and the ultimate questions about meaning and existence. Thank you so much. I hope you enjoyed it. Remember to keep some of these questions in your back pocket for any of these existential notions. And if I earned it, it would be so meaningful for you to subscribe so that we can focus on more content in philosophy and the human condition. See you in the next one.